In Climate Watch, a new United Nations report warns the impacts of climate change are increasing and inevitable. More than 100 scientists from across the globe put together the findings, which is the most extensive look to date at the effects of climate change on the environment. CBS News' Gwen Baumgardner has the details.
From the Earth's tallest peaks to the ocean floor, scientists warn no part of the world will be spared from the climate crisis.
The consequences for nature and humanity are sweeping and severe.
The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the unprecedented report, concluding that the planet can't keep up with global warming. The oceans, which act as a sponge for CO2 emissions, are at capacity, threatening to swallow up islands and coastal cities.
We need to take immediate and drastic action to cut emissions right now.
Scientists say climate change consequences are already happening, like melting ice in Antarctica and Greenland. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The report says failure to act soon will lead to a steady stream of catastrophes.
What is at stake is the health of ecosystems, wildlife, and importantly, the world we leave for our children.
One worst-case prediction sees 1 billion people affected by the year 2050. Drought and famine are forecasted, along with more frequent and destructive storms.
Imagine you have a story that your grandfather told you about, the town flooding, but it was back 80 years ago. Well, imagine that happening every year.
Scientists say the world is in a race against time to combat climate change, but hope the new findings will lead to action. Gwen Baumgardner, CBS News, London.
CBS News climate and weather contributor Jeff Berardelli joins me now. Jeff, what stood out to you in this report?
So I've read a bunch of these IPCC reports. They are dense, they're technical, they're sometimes difficult to read, and they're normally very conservative. They are not very assertive typically. They want to dot all their I's, cross all their T's before they make any assertions in the reports. This one's a lot more bold. It's a lot more assertive as they become more confident in the science. And so they're using words like unprecedented, irreversible, things that they might have left out a few years ago for diplomatic reasons are not left out this year. It's starting to get to the point where, the reports are catching up with the science, which is, oftentimes the science will establish something. The IPCC will be slow to adopt it, not slow to adopt it this time around. They are very assertive in saying that humans are causing irreversible changes to this Earth.
What do the scientists mean when they say the Earth's oceans have absorbed the rising temperatures we've seen?
Right. So greenhouse gases trap heat in. And the more carbon dioxide and more methane we release through the burning of fossil fuels, the more heat that's trapped in. Some of it gets absorbed by land, but 93% of it gets absorbed by the ocean. Why that's important is the ocean is huge. It's tremendous. And it controls the climate all over the Earth. And it comes back to haunt us. If you're absorbing all that heat, and take a look at that. Every single year, ocean heat content hits new records. And actually, the amount of ocean heat content that we have absorbed in the past 50 years, we're going to see 5 to 7 times that likely by the end of the century. And what does it do? It powers much stronger hurricanes. It causes heavier rains, more extreme weather, and also kills a lot of creatures in the sea. Coral reefs are in danger of being almost completely wiped out by the middle or late part of the century. Kelp forests are going to suffer, and they actually store a lot of carbon dioxide. We need kelp forests. Grass, ocean grass, that's also disappearing. Wetlands, 50% of them, we lost about that much over the past several decades. The point is, there are cascading impacts. You cannot kill coral and not expect it to reverberate through the food web. 25% of the ocean creatures at one point in their life depend upon the coral reefs. If the coral reefs are gone, where do they go? And then what happens to us as a consequence and the rest of the species as a consequence? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
This all sounds very frightening, truthfully. The report also discusses a relatively new phenomenon of marine heat waves in the oceans. Yeah. Could you explain that to us?
Right. So, marine heat waves have likely always occurred, but they've occurred naturally. 90% of the marine heat waves over the past couple of decades are now attributable to humans, attributable to human-caused climate change. So that's a tremendous amount. And they're expecting that by the end of the century, we could see them increase by 25-fold, so a 25 times increase in the amount of marine heat waves are possible by the end of the century, especially in a high emissions scenario. When I say a high emissions scenario, I mean business as usual. We keep burning lots of fossil fuels. And so the bottom line is most of the heat waves in the ocean are being caused by us now, and we're going to see them increase by 25 times. So basically all the coral is going to die if we don't do something to reel in all the fossil fuels that we're burning and all the greenhouse gases that we're releasing into the atmosphere.
You've touched on this, but what are some of the projected changes and risks? And I was asking you just before we were on camera here, what does it mean for people on the coastlines here?
So we're likely to see, they quantify the increase in sea level to be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 feet likely by the end of the century. NOAA has said it could be as high as 6 feet. And a lot of that depends upon if we see large chunks of Greenland fall into the sea. Those are things that we cannot predict. But judging by the amount of warming without any large chunks of Greenland or large chunks of Antarctica falling into the sea, 3 feet of sea level rise, that will affect about 1 billion people, if not more, because most folks live in cities and most folks live right by the coastline. So low-lying cities, especially Pacific Islands, will actually probably disappear. Those people will have to be relocated, and a lot of people who live in low-lying areas in Asia and Africa and even here in the United States will have to migrate and move to other areas. In the Arctic, we've lost 50% of the Arctic ice in the last 50 years, or actually 40 years. 50% in the last 40 years. It's a tremendous loss. It is likely, and first of all, it's unprecedented, at least in the last 1,000 years. That's what it says in this IPCC report. Likely many tens of thousands of years. It's actually, I should say, at least since the last ice age. So the last 1,000 years or so, we've seen unprecedented levels of sea ice in the Arctic. So there's just a lot of cascade effects, too. And by the way, one more thing that they mentioned that I hadn't seen them mention before, but it has been in the science for a couple of years, that when you really warm the Arctic and you demolish sea ice because of the warmer air, it causes the jet stream to do really funky things. And so we often will talk about it here in the United States during the winter, where this wavy jet stream is causing the jet stream to maybe be more wavy. Well, this report actually talks about the fact that it's causing perturbations or changes in the jet streams and changes in the storm tracks, and that has effects right here in the United States.
Jeff, thank you for breaking it all down for us in a way that we can understand.
You're welcome.
Thank you.